Guys, I had to slot this episode in before the one with Anthony. What can I say except when inspiration hits, you got to move fast. Oh my God. I'm sorry. If you're watching the video version of this episode, I apologize for my disheveled appearance. I wasn't expecting to jump on here tonight with an impromptu recording. Yet here we are. Well, here I am, donning the trackies and messy mum hair combo. Yay. If you're new here, welcome. This is Deathly Curious Australia, a podcast where we explore haunted places, paranormal experiences, and the deeper questions surrounding fear, energy, history, true crime, and the unknown. And I'm your host, Monique. Okay, so the deeper I got into planning these episodes for this season, the more I realised that there's something I really needed to talk about. Lately, there's been a shift in the way I've started viewing the paranormal. And honestly, the deeper I go into this world, the less black and white it all becomes. So tonight's episode is more of a bonus reflection episode. I haven't numbered it. Anthony's still going to be number 5. So this isn't just about ghosts or haunted places, but about what the paranormal has actually taught me. When people think about hauntings or paranormal experiences, I think there's this tendency to separate everything into categories. So real, real or fake, haunted or not haunted, spiritual or psychological. And I went into this a bit in my last episode. So after exploring some of these places myself, I honestly don't think it's that simple anymore. And I think that because paranormal experiences are deeply human experiences, they're emotional, psychological, spiritual, sometimes comforting and sometimes terrifying. And sometimes they're absolutely impossible to explain. I've never really been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. Even before investigations, I was always deeply curious about the unknown. I've always been spiritually aware and highly intuitive, and over the years I've explored psychic and mediumship development, spiritual healing and providing readings for people. But one thing I've learned through that journey is that spiritual development is never really finished. There's no point where you suddenly just know everything. The learning is infinite. The awareness deepens constantly, and the more experiences you have, the more you realize how much we still don't fully understand. So working closely with people through readings and spiritual work completely changed the way I view energy. Because when you spend years connecting with people emotionally, intuitively, and spiritually, you become incredibly aware of how energy affects people and how sensitive some individuals are to it. For me personally, being an empath has always amplified that awareness, not just with people physically around me, but sometimes through pure intention alone. I've had moments where I felt deeply connected to people energetically, even from the other side of the world, without physically being near them. And experiences like that really challenged the idea that everything we experience can always be explained in simple, logical ways. So when I walk into places with intense histories, places filled with suffering, grief, fear, or trauma, I don't walk into them feeling disconnected from that energy. I feel deeply affected by it. And maybe that's why certain locations stay with me more than others, because when you're highly emotionally, energetically aware, places don't just feel like buildings. Sometimes they feel like they're carrying something much heavier beneath the surface. And for me, the place that cemented that most was Arrowdale. There was something about Arrowdale that stayed with me long after we left. And I know people hear things like that all the time in the paranormal world, but this felt different. It wasn't just fear, and it wasn't just walking through an abandoned asylum at night and freaking ourselves out. That atmosphere felt truly heavy, like the buildings themselves were carrying an emotional weight. And maybe that sounds strange to some people. There are places where you walk in and feel uncomfortable because they're dark or eerie. And then there are places where you feel emotionally affected without fully understanding why. And Arrowdale was that for me. What stayed with me the most wasn't even seeing something visual. It was hearing things that I still cannot explain logically. The banging we experienced there still sits in my mind constantly, because I replay it, trying to rationalize it in my mind. What caused it? How was that even possible? Could there have been another explanation? And maybe there was, but even now I honestly don't know. And moments like that force you into this strange middle ground between belief and skepticism, because you start realizing that the paranormal isn't always about seeing a ghost standing in front of you. Sometimes it's about experiencing something that deeply affects you emotionally, and even when you can't fully explain why. At the same time, there are also moments where I feel far less connected, to be honest, and those moments make me question things even more, because spiritual awareness and intuition aren't something that feel on all the time. There's no switch, really. Sometimes I walk into a place and feel incredibly affected by the energy there, and other times I don't. And that opens up so many questions for me. Is it because of my own emotional state at the time, my own stress, exhaustion, or personal barriers from whatever I'm dealing with in life as a human being at that point in time? Is the location simply less active, or is it possible that I'm not just energetically aligned with whatever may exist there? I do think energy, emotion, and awareness are all deeply connected, though. There are certain periods in life where you feel far more open, intuitive, and emotionally receptive, and other times where you feel blocked, disconnected, or harder to tune in spiritually. And maybe that affects the experiences we have too. I think people often assume spirituality or psychic connection is very black and white, like someone either has an experience or they don't. But in my experience, it's much more fluid than that. Energy feels deeply connected to emotion, awareness, intuition, environment, and even your mental state at that time. And honestly, the inconsistency of those experiences is part of what keeps me questioning and exploring it all even further. One thing investigations have definitely taught me is how powerful fear really is. And honestly, I think fear changes everything. The moment you enter a location with a dark history, your body reacts differently. Your senses sharpen. Every sound feels amplified. Every silence feels louder. Every shadow suddenly seems darker than it really is. And I think what's important to acknowledge is that because fear absolutely affects perception. And at the same time, I don't think that automatically means every experience is imagined either. And that's where my perspective has changed the most. I think the truth possibly exists somewhere in between. I personally do believe places can hold energy, not necessarily in the dramatic Hollywood horror movie sense, but emotional residue, trauma, pain, suffering, grief. I think intense human experiences leave something behind. And maybe what we call hauntings are sometimes connected to that. Not always spirits in the traditional sense, definitely sometimes, but environments carrying emotional imprints from what was once there. So again, we talk about the layers I spoke about in the last episode. Honestly, some locations feel incredibly difficult to ignore once you've experienced them yourself. I also think people misunderstand why humans are so drawn to the paranormal. I don't think most people are chasing fear. I think they're chasing comfort, proof, meaning. It's because underneath almost every ghost story is a very human question. What happens after we die? And I think people want to believe consciousness continues in some way, that the people we love still exist somewhere, that death isn't simply silence. And honestly, I understand that completely. Because whether you believe in spirits, energy, religion, or something else entirely, there's something deeply comforting about the idea that life may continue beyond what we understand. The more I explore haunted places, the more I realize my search for proof has actually deepened. If anything, these experiences have made me more curious about what may exist beyond what we currently understand. I still want answers. I still seek evidence. I still have moments where I hope to experience something undeniable. My dog. But alongside that search for proof, I've also become deeply interested in the human side of the paranormal too. Why certain places affect us emotionally, why fear changes perception, why history lingers, why tragedy seems to leave an atmosphere behind. Because I don't think the paranormal exists separately from the human experience. I think the two are deeply connected. And maybe understanding that connection is just as important as searching for proof itself. And maybe that's why places like Arrowdale stay with people long after they leave. Not simply because they're haunted, but because they force us to confront something uncomfortable. How thin the line really is between psychology, emotion, energy, belief, and the unexplained. I don't claim to have the answers. And honestly, the deeper I go into this world, the more questions I seem to have. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the mystery itself is what keeps drawing us back. Because somewhere between fear and comfort, between skepticism and belief, between history and energy, is something deeply human waiting to be understood. So thank you for listening to this bonus reflection episode of Deathly Curious Australia. And next episode, Anthony joins me. But until then, remember, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't what we see, it's what we feel.